So I have this habit of naming my years in advance. And the idea was kind of inspired by this movie, Field of Dreams, which, if anyone's ever seen it, a lot of people know the famous line, "If you build it, they will come." We're not talking about that. We're talking about this guy. In the movie, this is Archibald Moonlight Graham. And at 22 years old, he has his big break, and he finally gets to play his first Major League Baseball game. And he plays for one inning of one game. And that's it. That's it. The thing that he'd worked so hard his entire life for, the practices, the waking up early, the teammates, everything came down to just one inning of one game. We meet back up with Dr. Graham a little later in life. And as he's looking back on all the things that he's done in his life, he says this line. He says, "We don't recognize the most important moments in our life while they're happening to us." And this stuck with me. This became the quote that I would always look back on, that as I went through my own life, I realized how many times this was true, that I didn't realize those most important moments who made me who I am today when they were happening to me. And so I kept this quote with me. And then I went to art school. And art school is interesting because I started to notice that a lot of the teachers had a similar pattern for pushing creativity. And I would bring them something I designed. I'd bring them something I put together, and they'd say, Joe, this looks great. Now what's the opposite of that? I don't know. This? And the teacher would look at this, and I'd bring this back, and they'd say, Joe, great. Now what's the opposite of that that's not the same as the original? What? This? And this idea just stuck with me, this idea of opposites, that if there's a black, there's a white. If there's a 1, there's a -1. If there's an up, there's a down. And so I took this idea of opposites, and I brought it back to Dr. Graham. And I started wondering if there's a version of us that doesn't recognize the most important moments in our life while they're happening to us. Is there a version that can recognize the most important moments when they're happening? And I realized that there is, and it's a fantastic little trick called time travel. If we can time travel, the things we can do if we could time travel. And now granted, you and I do not have the ability to time travel. Other people in history have gone through, and they've figured this out. They've done really well for themselves using time travel to their advantage. It's pretty good, right? Who knew there were this many of them? They've done this, and maybe this is something that, maybe it's not too far off. Maybe we're going to be able to see rideshare time travel billboards popping up across Chicago, and maybe we'll be able to sit there on our couch and pull out our app and choose when to go. And this is where it gets interesting, because when would you go? When would you time travel if you could time travel in life? Do you want to go back in time and see probably one of the most amazing concerts, the first time the Beatles played in America in 1964? Maybe we go get our own front row seats to Hamilton and travel back to 1781 to the Battle of Yorktown. Maybe it doesn't need to be that drastic. Maybe we just go back a couple of years, hang out with some friends, and watch some baseball in Chicago. But then what? Then what happens? After we're done having fun and going to experience these things, when we're done treating time travel like an amusement park ride, then what do? And it's at that point that I think we look back to our own lives. And we start looking back at the things that are important to us and the things that made us who we are, these memories and these feelings that we have. And I think for me, a big part of it would be being able to go back in time and see my grandmother again. That if I could have that one more conversation with her, just what that would mean to me and how I could use time travel to do that. And you're not going to find a picture of my grandmother online. There's no digital pictures of her that exist. She never had a Facebook. She doesn't have an Instagram. She never set up her queue. She's just here. And to see her is a part of my memories. And after we do that, after we get the chance to visit those that we love again, then what? Then what do we do with time travel? I think at that point, we start looking at ourselves. And we start looking back as how do we create the most incredible future version of ourselves? And that what we need is old Biff traveling back in time to give young Biff a copy of that sports almanac. Because if we could have this list, what can we do with this? And it's a list that tells us what we need to do. It tells us where we need to do it, and it tells us the right time that we need to do it. And the time What time do we need to go to? That's when it gets interesting. At what point in our life do we need to jump back to? And how do we know? How do we know that that day wasn't today? Because right now, we're still living in a world that needs a lot of help. And it's a world that has communities torn. And it's one in which communities still have a really hard time with basic concepts like life, like love, and an understanding of what it means to believe in something more. So what do? How can I help? But we don't have time travel. Time travel isn't real. Time travel is only in the movies. And then I think back to Dr. Graham. And it's only in the movies, time travel? Is it? I don't know. So what do I need? So let's chase this down together. Let's chase down this idea of actually going through and time traveling. So I need this list. This list. All the power of time travel comes down to being able to have this list that we can bring back to this current version of ourselves. For you to be able to leave this auditorium today, meet the future version of yourself outside, and give you that list and say, here, this is how you live the best version of your life. We'd love that. That'd be incredible. So let's chase down this list, and this is where time travel gets a little interesting. So stick with me, bear with me here as we go through this. So in order to get this list, what we need is the future version of ourselves traveling back in time to give the current version of ourselves this list. Once we have this list, we can create an alternate future for ourselves that's this incredible future version of us that now has this list. We can agree on this. We get this list, we get to do incredible things in life. Because the problem with this, as we just saw, the only way to get this list is from the future. And then I think back to Dr. Graham again. And if the only way to get this list is from the future, is there a way to get this list that's not from the future? So let's chase this down. Present you need this list. But the only way to get this list is from the future version of yourself. The opposite of that would be getting the list from the past version of yourself. If the past version of yourself has that list, you can still give that list to the present version of yourself and thereby still create this incredible future you version just by having this list. So where do we get it? What do we do from here? Because we don't have a list. But somewhere in time, this list needed to be created that we'd be able to follow. And I figured out where this list comes from. You write the list. Right now. You write the list today, and you're able to send that list in time through to yourself, that we can have that list. So once I figured this out, I wrote the list. So in 2014, I wrote a list of the 52 things that I wanted to do. And these weren't big things. These weren't life-changing things. These were just small things. These were just things that were important to me. That there were things that when 11:59 p.m. on December 31st rolled around, I could cheers and say, Joe, you did a good year. And it wasn't goals. It wasn't a bucket list. I just called it my it would be cool to list. Just a list of things that I didn't need to get done. But if I got done that year, that'd be pretty cool. And I took this list and I wrote it up on my window. And I realized when I did this, when I wrote this on my window, the past version of myself now sent a list to the present version of myself every morning I woke up. I had my list. And that's how I started to name my years in advance. Because what if I could write that list before it actually happened? So 2014, I took my first attempt at creating this list, and I called it my chess year, and I kind of put things together. And I was just starting to figure out what that means, of how am I actually making these things work. 2015 rolled around, and I started to put these pieces into place a little more. I called it my writing the ship year. And I realized I could start sending notes to myself in the future, that the past version of me could make lists, and the future version of me could benefit from those lists. So 2016, I was like, let's take this and try it to business. Let's see what happens if I spend my 2016 focused on business and building this thing up. And so in March of that year, I launched a brand new company. And in October of that year, I had that company acquired. So going into 2017, I was feeling real good about this idea. I feel like I figured out something in life. And I wanted to look at what do I want? How do I get more of what I want? And for me, a big thing that year was traveling. And so I called 2017 the exploration. I wanted to see more of the world. I wanted to see what I was capable of. In naming it the Exploration, I ended up traveling more that year than I've ever traveled in my life. And at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, 2017, as I went to go look back on that year called the Exploration, I realized that I learned a lot that year. And I felt small. I felt small in the world. All the people I've met, all the conversations that I had, I realized just how much bigger the world was than what I knew. And how can I change that? How can I possibly have a part in changing the world? And so I wanted to focus more on just changing my community and changing myself. So going into 2018, I named 2018 The Awakening. And I wanted to take this time to look at me, to look at what do I have to contribute? What is my place in the world? How do I fit in? And if I have this power of time travel, how do I use it? If I can do this, how do I actually use this to the best? And it's weird because when you start putting these lists together and you start naming your years, you never really know how it's going to play out. We don't know. And so to name a year The Awakening and then have a skateboarding accident and be able to actually wake up and see a different version of myself in the mirror, I think Alanis Morissette would really appreciate the amount of irony that occurred during that year. And this is all fun, but I don't know if this works. I don't know if naming your years in advance is some big thing. But I think maybe we'd make Moonlight Graham proud if we just started looking to try and recognize those most important moments in our life before they happen to us. And so what would you name it? If you had to name your 2019, what title would you give it? What chapter of your year is 2019 titled? For me, a big part of this year was I wanted to have more of a voice. I wanted to try and make more change in the world while I can. And I wanted a platform to be able to speak from. I wanted to inspire others to take action in their own life. And so I named 2019 Showtime. And I just finished giving my first ever TEDx talk. I think I just time traveled. Thank you, guys.